Hello everybody, it's Michael Hollands once again for Sound of the Movies. Today I have the pleasure to be joined by Ashley Avis. Over the course of her career, Ashley has directed and produced over 100 commercials for brands such as Mercedes-Benz, Coca Cola, Red Bull, Footlocker, and many more, as well as 4 feature films: Deserted, The Trouble with Mistletoe, Adolescence, and Black Beauty, which is available on Disney+. It is my pleasure to welcome Ashley Avis.
Hi, Michael. Thank you so much for having me.
It's great to have you on my show. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy schedule. I really appreciate that.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And Ashley, as I understand, you also majored in marketing and international business. And then you started working on commercials, and then you worked on feature films. What sparked your interest in storytelling back then?
Well, I grew up wanting to be a writer. I always had that sense of knowing that becoming a writer, a novelist, a journalist was the direction that I wanted to take my life. At a young age, I thought I would become an author in the young adult space or in the sci-fi fantasy space. I always loved reading books in the sci-fi genre. And so I wrote little books and little novels when I was a kid. I was the kid on the playground that read the thesaurus for fun. I loved language and poetry so much. And so as I progressed through my childhood and my youth, and much of that was also spent riding horses, I eventually went to school in New York City. And I very much wanted to, I wanted to go to NYU, but places like that are expensive. And I ended up getting a scholarship to go to Manhattan College, which is a little Catholic college up in Riverdale, about an hour north of the city. And I ended up applying because I've always run little businesses over the course of my life, and I double majored in international business and marketing. And I wanted to get out of school quickly. So I graduated in about 2.5 years. I stacked classes over the summer. I just really wanted to get out into the real world and start my career. So while I was in college, because I was interested at the time in possibly pursuing a career in journalism, I ended up writing for Nielsen Media, and I became a regional editor there and was doing articles for them. And I realized quickly that while I really valued that kind of writing, that wasn't quite the path that I was extremely passionate about pursuing. I was more story driven and fiction driven. And so I dabbled with theater a little bit, but acting wasn't my comfortable place either. But I realized I loved entertainment. So I started interning for different production companies in college, one of which was Plum Pictures, which is Celine Rattray's company, which doesn't exist anymore, but it was a wonderful home to start reading screenplays and digesting just that side of the world. And when I read my first screenplay, it was like that moment people describe when they realize, oh my gosh, this is exactly it, that light bulb moment. Because screenplays to me, it feels like, and they still do, it feels like you're writing poetry and you've got this very limited amount of space to write something very visually driven and very beautiful. And so I was still in school and I was writing my own spec screenplays behind my economics book. And once I graduated, I saved up a little bit of money to move to Los Angeles. And that's where I wrote one of my first spec pilots that I saved up again a little bit of money to shoot a teaser for it, to shoot an example episode. And that little episode, which I did for a few $1,000s, ended up getting on the radar of the founder of Lionsgate, Frank Giustra. And he thought it was good. He thought it was funny. And he asked me to pitch it to him. And I did. It was the first time I had ever pitched anything. And I had maybe all of 10 minutes because he's a wonderful but very, very busy person. And he believed in me. And my dad has always said, find your champions. And it takes a long time sometimes, but Frank was decidedly my very first champion in this business, besides my wonderful parents. And he ended up financing a few episodes of that television project. And while that series never went, it was a window into realizing that I wanted to become a director, how much I loved working with actors, how much I loved visually executing what I had written on the page. That period of my life lends itself to what's happening in our industry now, with encouraging more diverse voices to go into different fields, to step into the director's chair, because I never associated myself with becoming a director as a woman when I was a kid, because I just didn't, you don't see that representation. But then once I put myself on set and just decided to experiment, I realized very quickly that felt like my calling. So I'm just very excited for the changes that are happening in our industry right now. They're very positive.
Thank you very much for elaborating on that, Ashley. I would like to briefly talk about your work in commercials. As I mentioned in my introduction, you have worked for many successful brands. And if anyone is interested, which I'm sure you are, you can check out Ashley's website and you can find a couple of commercials there. And I liked your Mercedes-Benz commercial in particular because it also tells a story as opposed to just, showing a few fancy shots of the car, which happens a lot these days in commercials. There is a lack of storytelling, I believe, sometimes. And what can you tell me about your approach for directing commercials?
Well, as a storyteller, as a writer, you almost can't help yourself, where I always want to infuse story or some kind of arc into everything that I'm directing. And obviously it depends on the spot that you're directing and to the degree that you're able to do that. But I love when I can infuse story and I can infuse a love story or a through line that includes a character arc. And I love directing commercials because I feel like every time you're on set as a director, you're learning something new and you're working those muscles, or you're trying something different, or you're experimenting. So I love being on set as much as I possibly can. And the commercial side of my work, I started with, and I mentioned that little spec pilot that kick started my career. From there, I started reaching out to really small brands, like jewelry brands, fashion brands. And I knew at that time, I was about 22, I wanted to build a portfolio of work so that I could build a small production company. Obviously, you need work to be able to do that and to attract clients. So in the early days, and this is over 10 years ago now, in the early days, you're doing work where you're making no money, and then you work up to you're making maybe a little bit of money, and then you start getting on the radar if you're doing your job properly and you're honoring those clients, where you're finally starting to get a foothold into getting recommended or getting on the radar of advertising agencies. And that started happening over the course of about a decade. But it was, it's sometimes very slow going, and you've just got to stick with it. And it's really, for me as a director, it was really about developing my visual style. But as a producer and a businesswoman, I really wanted to grow my business. And so it's been a fascinating learning experience to direct commercials. And again, just you learn from every single one.
Right. Do you see a major or minor difference between shooting a commercial versus shooting a movie? I mean, other than, of course, the length of the feature.
Sure. Well, it's interesting because I started with the really small commercials where it's really difficult. People are working for really low rates. You're begging for discounts. You're begging for locations to come in under what their usual fees are. It's when you get started, it's always tough. But as you progress into the bigger, either broadcast commercials or the spots that are being done through agencies, there are really healthy budgets out there where all of a sudden, after years of trying to make things work, you've got a beautiful table of craft services. And it's just, once you get into that bigger budget range for commercials, I find that outside of the very particular nature of working with clients and with agency and with wanting to service and make everyone very happy, there are a lot of different people in the mix when you get to the bigger commercial world. But ultimately, in terms of execution, you usually have a really good budget to where everybody's happy with the rate they're getting, where you're shooting on the lenses you want to because you can afford them. So now that we've graduated into that world on the commercial side, we still take small jobs sometimes too if they're creative. But on the bigger commercial side, executing that work is much easier, decidedly, than a feature film. I mean, even with Black Beauty, which we had a $12 million budget, which isn't a lot for the scale of that production. We had a 6-week shooting schedule that ended up being more like 7.5 because I was milking out every pre-shoot day, every moment we could film something. I was trying to get a small crew together to film these extra moments we needed in the script. And I felt like my independent sensibility and that scrappiness of how I had to put things together over the course of 10, 12, 13 years was really helpful, that I wasn't, I didn't come from just directing big commercials or having the luxury of starting in that way. I started very much by wearing so many different hats and location scouting on my own, because we wanted to put the extra money on screen. So I think the biggest difference between the commercial world at the broadcast level and the film world, the film world has so many more challenges and so many more working parts. And, they both have their own challenges, but trying to put together a feature film is like building a massive clock. There are so many millions of pieces to it, and they all have to work together to create that beautiful piece of work.
Your work has been described as timelessly romantic, innocent, blending innocence with seduction, and elegantly sensual. How would you describe your own work?
I've always really resonated with very lyrical, very romantic, very elegant imagery, very fluid, sweeping cinematography, a sense of timelessness, a sense of true love. You'll see a lot of love in my work, and that's either as a director or as a writer. I'm very much drawn to love stories, whether they're traditional or more unconventional, like in our independent film Adolescence. But that's how I would describe my sensibility. I love sweeping landscapes and huge, beautiful, painterly wides. I love filmmakers like Terrence Malick with his nature sensibility and allowing our images to be washed with gold and sunrise and sunset. And then I also really love very intimate character stories where you focus in on extreme close-ups of eyes and lingering glances and fingertips through grass. So I'm very flattered with some of those quotes that have described my directing style, but that's what I resonate with. Elegant, lyrical, beautiful work.
Great. And I was going to ask you about this anyway, but I feel your strong suit, or one of your strong suits, is to focus on character-driven films. It was obvious also in Adolescence. I mean, your ability to focus on people's issues and the troubles of growing up. I would like to talk about the casting process, also in terms of Black Beauty in particular. How would you describe the process of finding the right characters, and also working and writing the screenplay with a specific actor in mind, perhaps?
It's such a beautiful gift when you actually get a project to the stage where you're casting it and it's real and you're going into production. Because as a writer, you write 100 things and maybe you're lucky enough to have one go. And we were very fortunate with Black Beauty. And I really love character-driven stories. I absolutely love working with actors. I love rewriting their dialogue once they're cast and I get to know them, actor as character. And I'm a very collaborative director, so I just really love getting the actor's thoughts and finding the naturalism to speech patterns. So the casting process with Black Beauty it was pretty surreal, because I personally tend to write screenplays very much without actors in mind, unless I'm writing it for a particular person. And for example, I've discussed a project with a particular actor and we know we want to do it together. Otherwise, I really try, just like in a novel, when you read a book, you imagine the character in your mind's eye. And that's really how I generally approach the writing process. But with Black Beauty, it was unique because the story obviously is told from the first person perspective of the horse, which was brilliantly done for the first time by Anna Sewell back in the late 1800s. She took that creative leap that was so unique. And so our film follows the same structure. It's told from Beauty's point of view. So we had early conversations with the producers about a number of things, because it's creative, it's financial. You can't just cast an unknown actor to voice a role like that. To get the movie off the ground and financed, that has to be someone that everyone around the world wants to hear and see. So we had a short list, but the only person that I could really imagine, and I started hearing her voice when I wrote the very first line of the screenplay. And then I thought, oh boy, I can't believe I have this person in my head, because this could be completely impossible. And it was Kate Winslet. And I grew up adoring Kate Winslet and her work in Titanic. And my dad actually told me when I was a little girl how ambitious Kate Winslet was, and how she had written a letter to James Cameron. And I still don't know if that's true. And I haven't asked her yet, but one day I will. And he would use her as an example of elegant persistence. And so I actually write letters to actors. Anyone we are offering a role to, I'll write a personal letter, and I'll spend hours on them. They're always very authentic. There's no copying and pasting, and I do that because of the inspiration of the story my dad told me about Kate. And so, of course, once you have an Oscar winner in your mind, the likelihood of their schedule being aligned with yours, or if they like the script, or if, there's so many factors in casting. But the producers loved Kate, and we offered the role to her. And it was so surreal the day that I got the call that she said yes. And it didn't really even sink in until we saw the announcement in the trades and Variety that Kate Winslet is part of our cast. It really cemented itself then. And just working with her, obviously in the state the world is in right now, instead of working with her personally in London, we ended up doing remote sessions where she tuned in. She actually recorded all of Black Beauty's voiceover from her home in the country, in the barn that she has on her property, because it had the best reception, which was really, really for the fact that she was voicing the inner thoughts of a horse. And so we were in Los Angeles, and we were up at midnight, 1, 2 a.m. Some of our sessions started very late Los Angeles time, so that with the different time zones. But it was just such a beautiful process. And there were a number of times where tears were streaming down my face to hear somebody like Kate Winslet read the words that I had put on the page, or infamous quotes, very famous quotes by Anna Sewell. It was really, really beautiful. So that was the casting process with Kate. And actually, before Kate signed on, the first person, she was the second actor we went to. We wanted to cast Joe Green first, to really give a sense of the direction we were going with the project overall. We really wanted to, it was really important to me to cast a very elegant actor for Joe, who would be a really great role model for the little girls and the families and the people that would see the film. And given Joe swings in age from age 17 to, I always imagined her in her mid to late 20s at the very end of the movie, I really didn't want to cast two different actors to play Joe. And the producers agreed. I had have a wonderful relationship with Jeremy Bolt, who's the lead producer. And it's wonderful to have true creative partners. And my husband and producing partner, Edward Winters, was an EP as well. So we just had a very supportive, family-driven team where everyone was really respectful of one another. And so when it came down to Joe's casting, at some point I was told to put together a list of 20 actors to play Joe. And I'll never forget thinking, that's impossible, because Joe is so specific. That swing in age, this young woman needs to have the innocence and the timelessness, but the physicality and the excellence as an actor to believably play 17 and then to believably swing to an older age. And I really didn't want to cast someone in their mid-20s. I wanted the physicality and the true innocence of someone in their late teens. That's a very specific time in a young woman's life. And so I was racking my brain about who in the world is Joe? Are we going to have to go on a national casting search? And then my husband and I were rewatching Interstellar, and Mackenzie Foy plays young Murph, and opposite Matthew McConaughey. And she delivers such a powerful performance in that movie. She's so deeply good and nuanced. And I turned to Ed in that moment. I said, that's Joe, that's Joe, that's Joe. That has to be Joe. There is nobody else. And I emailed Jeremy Bolt instantly that night. He replied that night. And thankfully, I wrote her one of my letters. Thankfully, she said yes. She had grown up with Black Beauty, and she's just an exquisite person, actor, very, very kind, and embodies all of the things I wanted for Joe Green.
You said you were very collaborative. And how do you work with actors in terms of getting the performance right in order to make sure everything is authentic?
I think it's really about respect and mutual trust. I love sitting down, like for Black Beauty, for example, Mackenzie and Iain Glen and Iain Glen plays John Manley, the horse whisperer. And he's just goodness. He's one of the kindest people I've ever met. He's just such a lovely, lovely soul, in addition to being an excellent actor. And I really like hearing the thoughts of everyone on set. I it's, to me, it's best idea wins, and there's no ego involved, because you're in a movie. It's not just about one person. It's not just about the script. It's not just about the director. It's not just about the saleability or the actors. It's one living, breathing thing. And if everything works together, the movie really sings. So once Iain and Mackenzie got to Cape Town, we sat down at the location that was Birtwick Stables, and and we ended up sitting in the dirt, and there was this rooster that kept trying to attack us. It was so funny. Iain Glen chasing this huge rooster away, and we literally sat in the dirt, sat in the grass underneath this tree by a paddock with a bunch of horses that kept trying to eat our script pages. It was really darling. And we just went through the entire screenplay, and I really like hearing the words aloud so that I can rewrite, and I can ask the actors to be very open to, for example, there might have been a sentence where Mackenzie said, can I say it this way? Let's try it this way. Does this sound good? This makes more sense to me for XYZ reasons. Or, for example, initially we didn't have any riding scenes where John is actually really riding. He would walk up on a horse, and John said, I'd really love, if it's possible, to just have maybe this scene I can be on a horse and just driving home that I'm a horse whisperer. And you want to listen to your actors, because they're the ones embodying the characters that you've written. They're the ones that are living and breathing those people. And I love that process. And I think that openness, when there is that level of respect and love, it only makes things better. So I did a lot of rewriting, and I always do, over the course of a production. And that's one of my favorite parts.
I would like to talk about the process from page to screen. You faced a humongous task this time. You adapted and wrote the screenplay. You edited the picture for the first time, and then you also directed it. And what is essential when you're adapting a screenplay, and when it comes to your work? How do you know what is essential, what you have to focus on, and what is actually intrinsic to the whole storytelling process?
Well, given that we were adapting a very, very famous, beloved novel, I felt this huge sense of responsibility to Anna Sewell's original text. Growing up with that book, which I did, Black Beauty inspired my love of horses. I started riding horses because of Black Beauty. So to be able to write and direct and edit that as a filmmaker, it was very much a merger of two unbelievable passions. I mean, this film couldn't be more of a passion project for me. But given that I grew up with the book, and so many people have been very impacted by that novel, it's changed people's lives. So many people start riding horses or fall in love with the world of horses because of Black Beauty. I really wanted to find the parallels between the original text set in late 1800s London primarily, and be able to bring the original characters and the events and what's found in those chapters to life in a modern day setting. And so the fire sequence, for example, was adapted from a groom, a gentleman that went into the stable in the original novel, and he had a pipe, and he was careless, and he left the pipe, and it set a fire ablaze in the stable, and Black Beauty has to be rescued, and so does Ginger. So translating that into modern day, we have a young groom who just isn't paying attention, and it's a bit of a social commentary. He's got his nose in his cell phone, and he leaves a heater on the floor, and it's not yet cool yet, and a piece of hay blows in there, and that's very real. That story was actually inspired by, I was talking to, I've got an aunt in Casper, Wyoming that has a ranch, and I was just asking her, because we didn't want to show cigarettes in the movie, what else could what could set a stable on fire that's unconventional, and she said, little things like heaters, and that instantly sparked the idea to adapt that particular original chapter of the novel, original event in the novel, into the fire scene that we have today. So it was really drawing all of those parallels and not wanting to just rip off a very, very famous title and create a new story. But then, of course, there were changes that we made along the way, especially given that our world really needs more diverse voices right now. It was important to us to have more of a female lens on the story. So we decided to make Beauty female and to make Joe Green female. That was one of the major changes. And then the origin story of Black Beauty was one of the things I struggled with the most at the script stage, because she grows up as a cab horse in London. And we have cars now, so there's no real direct parallel to the bulk of her life. So I went back to research why Anna Sewell wrote the novel in the first place. And I read that she was crippled as a little girl, and she was literally carried by horses most of her life. And that inspired her very unique love and understanding of them. And she really was one of the first. She definitely had natural horsemanship principles that she infused in Black Beauty, in the way she talks about kindness and empathy. And she really revolutionized our understanding of horse and animal empathy with the publication of Black Beauty. So I thought, given she's made such a powerful impact on our world, and she changed laws and she protected the horses of her time, what key issue can we illuminate in our film? And that's when I discovered what wild horses are going through in our country. And they're being rounded up in the Western states by helicopters and put into these massive permanent holding facilities. Some don't even have shade. Wild horses have family structures a lot like humans. So if you take away a stallion from his mare and his foal, it's like losing a child. It's like losing a father or a mother. It's really, 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 really sad what's going on. And I think it's very black and white as to how wrong it is. So I thought, why don't we elegantly intertwine a real issue like that and honor why Anna Sewell wrote the novel in the first place? So I was very fortunate to have really supportive producers that understood why I wanted to intertwine those themes. And we didn't hit it over the head, but at the same time, it's really powerful. We show a real roundup sequence. We have real wild horse footage in the movie. My partner and husband, Ed, and I ended up raising a little bit of money to start a documentary right before we shot Black Beauty, to capture some beautiful real images of wild horses in the wild, and then to actually film real roundups so that we could understand what that actually looks like. And it's just very heartbreaking, but witnessing real roundups actually helped inform how I would capture the roundup sequence in Black Beauty. And then we actually ended up adopting 2 wild horses from the roundup that we filmed that are just starting the gentling process. They're called Zafira and Zion, a little colt, and his mother, this beautiful black mare. So it was a very unique writing process from all of those angles.
And then, of course, you went into principal photography, and if I got it right, you shot for 7.5 weeks, right?
Yeah, about 7.5 weeks, yes.
Okay. And of course, you recreated a classic story. And of course, I think it also helps an audience to forget about the troubles of everyday life, especially in, dire straits we're living in right now. So it's a lovely story, but it also has very dramatic aspects in there. And of course, the relationship between Jo and her uncle, Mackenzie Foy and Iain Glen. Then Jo meets her love interest, and the relationship with his mother is very complicated. So it's a multifaceted story.
It very much is. And it's unique because Anna Sewell wrote the original novel with this episodic nature of Beauty meeting different owners, the good owners, the bad owners, the people in between. So that's something I very much wanted to capture as well. We expounded upon the relationship between Jo and Beauty and gave that more of an arc, where Jo is not part of Beauty's life for a shorter period of time, obviously, than the novel, but we still get to see the different owners, and casting all of those different actors was so much fun. I mean, Claire Forlani was wonderful as Mrs. Winthorpe, and Callum Lynch, who played George, and Mackenzie had just great chemistry on set for that little innocent romance that we get to have in the film. So that was just, the casting process was just great. We actually cast a lot of our supporting cast out of South Africa, out of Cape Town and Johannesburg, and it's just, there's so much talent in so many different parts of the world, and it was really important to me to also cast a lot of actors out of Cape Town, because that's where we were filming, and we were able to do that because there was just such excellence in the thespians down there.
Of course, needless to say, shooting a movie and getting everything off the ground is hard work. You need to have a script, you need a production company, you need financial backing, you need to shoot it, you need to go into post-production, and we've covered quite a lot of ground. But Ashley, if I may ask, where do you see the most difficult aspects of filmmaking, as some would say the trials and tribulations of filmmaking, or something that doesn't come easy to you?
Well, I think just in terms of process, getting anything off the ground is always very difficult. Getting somebody to believe in your vision, even if you feel like you've written the best screenplay of your career, or you have the best idea, or you have this amazing book you want to adapt. It's so hard to get people to pay attention when there are so many wonderful writers, directors, actors. It's trying to stand out from a sea of really, really wonderful people. There's so much talent in the entertainment industry. So I think that trying to forge your path and to figure out your style and to build your portfolio and your resume up to a point where you can start taking bigger meetings and you can start being taken more seriously. You can just get people to listen to an idea or read a screenplay because they like your previous work. I think the building and growing process is probably the most difficult for any filmmaker, any writer, director. And then with Black Beauty in particular, the post process was the most difficult because we had a really, really tight budget, and we had a very tight schedule for my director's cut. So after we finished Black Beauty, after principal photography was complete, I ended up flying to Munich, and I edited out of the RE World headquarters, and I lived there for about 4 months. And I was working 7 days a week because I was editing the film, and I had a key to the office and access to the hard drive. So of course I'm in there all the time. And so I poured my entire soul into the editing of this movie. And for people that might be listening to this who are on the more technical side or who are editors or filmmaker editors, I started without an assembly. I started from frame zero, blank timeline, nothing. And the daunting nature of that, once I actually sat down to do it, was just, holy cow, I've been given this incredible opportunity. Constantine Film was such a champion of mine, and they believed in me enough to let me edit my own feature. And I've been cutting my own work for 12 or 13 years. I edit almost all of my commercials. I've edited parts of my features. I've edited, extensive shorts that are 30, 40 minutes, but it's different editing a feature like movie that has a lot of expectations on it. And so the pressure that I'm very much a perfectionist, and I put a lot of pressure on myself, but especially doing something brand new for the first time and knowing that the only reason you're doing it is because people believe in you. That was hard on some days, especially when you have moments of doubt in any capacity or any industry where you have an off day and you feel like your work isn't any good, or you, as a writer, you want to throw away the pages, but you work for the days where everything seems to sing and your gut just feels, wow, that's exactly what I wanted to do. And so the post process, I had 12 weeks to complete my director's cut. And by contrast, 10 or so weeks should have been the amount of time to put together just the assembly, had I been working with another editor who would have put together an assembly, and I would have then come in and we would have started shaping it together. I had the same amount of time to cut the entire movie. And that was just our schedule. And the reason I ended up editing, and again, the belief from Constantine, but I got it done in 12 weeks. And then the producers came in with their notes, and we started shaping things together. And then when Disney decided to acquire the movie, which was, we couldn't have hoped for a better partner. And they actually sent a wonderful executive to Munich when I was doing my director's cut. And I showed him about half an hour of the movie with certain scenes, and Disney came aboard. And then we had, I think it was five or so months of notes on top of the original producer notes from Disney, because obviously it's one of the greatest studios on the planet and the perfect home for a family film like this. They had their own thoughts of how we could make it even better. And so because we were in a time of COVID, I had to leave Munich in March, and I had a complete editing studio set up in my living room, taking notes and working in different time zones because the VFX was being done in South Africa. Some of it was being done in Germany. And then we were getting notes from Germany, from Los Angeles. So, I mean, I slept very little for about, but I wouldn't change it for the world. It was just a unique, beautiful process. And I learned a lot.
Lots of input from lots of different people. And then, of course, you have to pray that the audience will embrace it in the end.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. Exactly.
It's always the tricky part. I mean, if an audience embraces a movie, it doesn't necessarily mean that you were entirely happy with it. You know, many directors say, well, we could have done a better movie if we had had more time, for instance. Or oftentimes a film bombs at the box office, yet it's a very good movie. So you can't necessarily say, well, I felt I didn't make enough money in return, so the quality of the movie suffered. So these two are not necessarily linked to each other.
I heard two quotes when I was a teenager by a director that I interned for, and he spoke these to me in the same day when he told me he thought that I should become a producer. He said, "In film, the time you have is the time you need, and pressure makes diamonds." And I've always carried those two quotes, which I think very much link together with me as a filmmaker, because the reality is, even if you have a huge budget, you never have enough time. You always want an extra shot. You always want to have more money for VFX or for this or for that, or you're taking a pay cut to put more money on the screen, but you need to utilize, at least this is my perspective. If you've been given an opportunity, you need to utilize and recognize the resources that you have, and then understand the difficulties that you're going to have along the way, and put yourself, drive forward, drive into them, figure out how to become creative, to jump over those obstacles or deal with those budget challenges. And that's the product that you're going to be able to make. And I'm with something like Black Beauty. Do I wish we had a bigger budget? Sure. Do I wish we had more time? Sure. But at the same time, we crafted the movie that we were destined to craft. And everyone just, for example, our crew in South Africa, it was one of the greatest crews I've ever worked with in my life. Everyone we all threw our weight into the collar, so to speak, because we knew we didn't have enough time. We knew that we were going to have to move faster, and our setups needed to be faster, and people were breathless sometimes. I mean, I was constantly running around the set trying to get to, we were doing a setup somewhere where we knew that as soon as we were done with this scene, we could move over to that scene. And it was, a lot of that was just like constructing these ballets of, we definitely are 2 hours short on time. How do we compensate for that? How do we get creative for that? For example, the scene in Urshel where we have the race. We've got George's race. We have the youth race that opens up the event. We have the cars at the beginning. We have the introduction to that massive scene. And then we've got this big, big stunt where Beauty falls and scrapes her knees. And then all of the race, all of the coverage that was needed for that scene was absolutely bonkers insane. We had 2 days to shoot all of that. It was not possible. We arrived on the very first day, and our DP, David Proctor, who's a wonderful cinematographer and highly intelligent and very creative, and he turned to me, and he was with his camera operator and our Steadicam op, Damien and Dale, and we were just such a team. These guys were unbelievable, constantly problem solving. But that was one day where we all stood there and they said, "This is just not possible. We can't. There's no way we can't do it." Yes. And so I think it's those moments as a director, you're leading a team, instead of panicking. And of course there are moments where you want to panic because, oh my goodness, it's, this amount of money is on the line. The producers are going to, be so angry if I can't figure this out.
Yes.
I lean into those moments, for better or for worse, with this odd sense of calm. And I don't know what that is, but I think it's, just doing a lot of preparation and being able to take a step back and think, okay, this is impossible. How do we make it possible? How do we solve this? What do we cut? What do we change? And for Urshel, I had developed this trust with David Proctor and our camera team so much over the course of, this was toward the like 3/4 mark in the shoot. And I said, David, David has a ton of commercial experience. He's shot a lot of cars. He's got a very, very, very strong sense of action. I said, look, there's no way that we're going to make this day. You're right. This is impossible. You need to go take over all of the key racing beats, except for the major stunts or like the major emotional moments. Go spend the next 6 hours just shooting the actors and the horses. And we had shot lists for everything. We knew frame by frame all of the coverage we needed. But to not observe all of that was a major leap in faith for me. And I'm very, in a good way, I think, very detailed and about everything. I want to be on set for everything. But David went, and he had this essentially like this vehicle with a crane. It was called a Terex, with the camera hanging off of it. And he filmed a lot of the action beats we needed while I went and worked with the actors and did all of the emotional scenes that were required for the day. And then we actually ended up making that impossible day. But that's just one example of, if you don't have enough time, money, well, suck it up, because nobody ever has those elements. So
Yes. And that's so difficult to handle. I can imagine. I mean, you have people breathing down your neck ultimately, and that's an aspect of filmmaking which I believe many audience members oftentimes overlook, or simply they may not know this or even care about this. But let's say you have an 80-page script, 80 to 100 pages, and then of course you need to figure out your schedule, and then you need to find out how many pages a day you need to shoot.
Breaking that down is a very tricky process. And the original screenplay for Black Beauty, my first draft was 118 pages. Our shooting script was 103. And I really tightened things during the script stage, because we knew we couldn't shoot 118 pages, and the movie was just a little bit too long. And you know, I was really fortunate for my first big movie, not an independent movie where you have all the control you want. And that's not always good, because when you find good collaborative partners, their insight, whether you agree with it when they give you the note or not, I really try to sit with notes now, because sometimes in the moment you think, oh no, that's going to destroy this. But then you take a step back and you get your ego out of the way, and sometimes you think, oh my gosh, that's actually a really great note. Let me try it. Or there's something, I agree with some of the nuances of it, or some of the notes of it, but let me play it a different way. Let me present it a different way, or try it a different way. So I got very lucky with Constantine and with Jeremy and with Robert and Martin over there. And obviously you're here in Germany, but they were just such a wonderful home for me as a young filmmaker to take that next really big leap. And Jeremy was never the type of producer who ever was breathing down my neck. He would come into the tent and sometimes say, Ashley, this is impossible. And I would say, Jeremy, I know, but I'm going to figure it out. And then he would give me my space and let me figure it out. And we built that level of trust. So it's, again, finding your champions. I would say Jeremy is definitely my second big champion in my career.
Great. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts on that. And also, I would like to mention that the cinematography in this film is very good and it looks gorgeous. So kudos to you and to your DP, David Proctor. And I'm a huge fan of cinematography, and I believe in the power of visuals to, let's say, also often not carry a movie, that probably the wrong term, but it contributes largely to the final product. That's what I should have said initially.
Absolutely, and I'm a very visual director, and I've fallen in love with the texture and the sweeping nature of visuals is something I very much lean into. And this whole movie started because I took a general meeting with Jeremy Bolt, just a meeting that my manager had set up where you get to know producers, they get to know you and your work, and you hope that maybe down the line you'll find something to collaborate on. And I in that first meeting with Jeremy, we had tea and we talked about movies that inspired us to go into this business. And I happened to mention The Black Stallion and the scene on the beach with Alec in the black and the beautiful cinematography in that movie and the nature of it being so lyrical, where that whole scene, there's no dialogue. It's just set to beautiful score, and it's about the relationship between a boy and a horse, and this mystical kind of connection that they have between each other. And how I loved that scene, especially for the cinematography and the emotion. And Jeremy said, I love that scene too. I love that film. You know, my partner Robert and I have wanted to remake Black Beauty for 10 years. Let me know if you have any interest. Let me know if you have a take. And I had an idea right in the room, and ran home and wrote this 40-page pitch with visuals and how I wanted to approach it. And the movie actually ended up going very quickly for our industry. From that first general meeting where I walked into Jeremy's office with, we were just going to talk about different projects we wanted to do. Black Beauty evolved from that and was released within about 3 years and a week from Disney, which is, again, just crazy fast. And just speaking to the cinematography, David, it was such a wonderful partner. We had a short list of DPs at the beginning, and just the big famous DPs that either our budget couldn't support or were busy. And you always have your short list. But it wasn't about finding someone with a big name. It was about finding someone who was the perfect partner and who had this very particular texture and framing and style that I so wanted to infuse Black Beauty with. And so I asked at a certain stage, and I wasn't responding. We had some big DPs that were excited about the movie, and I just wasn't really responding to a few people stylistically. And so I asked Constantine to just forward me all of the lists from the agencies that had DPs on their roster, and some of these lists had 40 people on them. And I went through 300 different links, and I found David, and I thought, oh my gosh. And he hadn't shot anything like Black Beauty that was in like the family genre, but as a commercial director, I know the experience that you get from directing commercials. And David had directed a ton of beautiful commercials. And then he had done this one series for Netflix called The Innocents, which I started watching. And the minute I started watching his work, I thought, oh my goodness, his sense of color, his sense of texture, his sense of framing, the beautiful lyrical nature of his framing, even though The Innocents was a much darker kind of sci-fi series. It had nothing to do with Black Beauty, but I thought that's exactly his style, is exactly what I want to infuse in Beauty. And then luckily, again, it was another moment of trust from Jeremy, pairing a young director with a young DP. That's usually not how it goes. Usually they want to pair a young director with a very, very seasoned DP that has done, a million movies. And David and I had only done independent films, but he was the perfect partner for me. And it just ended up being really, really perfect. So again, I'm thankful for having good partners that would believe in something like that and take a chance and take a risk.
Right. And Ashley, if we still have some time left, I need to mention the music. I need to mention the score, which was written by Guillaume Roussel. I think it's a fabulous accomplishment. How did you collaborate with him? When did you find him, actually? Or how?
Guillaume is just, I can't speak more highly of him. And he's not only a colleague, but a friend now. And we collaborated. It was about a year. It might have been 13 months. I met him because he had worked with Jeremy Bolt before. And Jeremy, when he initially told me about Guillaume, he said, you have to meet with him first. He's just so talented and so kind and so collaborative and so creative. And he's a protege of Hans Zimmer, and he just has this amazing sensibility. And I feel like the music drives the movie in such a particular way. I mean, even when I'm writing a screenplay, I put together individual writing playlists with music that resonates with me, and I listen to certain songs for different scenes. Like the opening of Black Beauty, I listened to this track called I Wonder as I Wander, which I very, very much in the pacing of how I wrote that scene, the tempo of the voiceover, all of that was very particular to the tempo of the track that I used for inspiration. And I did that over the course of the movie. So to find somebody like Guillermo, who he works just like I do, in the sense that there's no ego involved. It's creative, it's collaborative. Yes, it's going to be hard at times, but it should be really fun. And he has this sensibility that I've just always resonated. He's got this elegance and this lyricism, but he can also go in the direction of some, a very engaging, energetic cue for the fire scene or the river scene, which is so powerful. But it's the moments of simplicity are the ones that resonate the most to me. And the way he constructed the opening cue and especially the closing cue, which is this very long piece of music with so many nuances to it. The minute I heard that cue for the first time, well, many of his cues, I would just sit there crying. And we developed this very honest relationship with each other because we're both so open and so emotional and artistic. We would have these Skypes while I was editing the movie, and he would play me a piece of music, and I would just sit there with tears streaming down my face. Embarrassed to let him see that because it was so honest, because his music is so moving, and it was so much fun to identify different themes in the movie, like the idea of a separation theme, and hearing certain things when Beauty and Joe are separated, or Beauty is thinking of Joe, and finding the different instruments that were very much akin to each character. Like Joe was piano, Beauty had more wind instruments, the feeling of being wild. John had some guitar. It was just so much fun to collaborate that way. And goodness, I can't I can't wait to work with Garem for my entire career. It's when you meet people of that level of excellence, it's, that you have a partner forever.
Very well put. That's kind of collaboration. Many people want or wish to have that kind of collaboration, but they never, or they reach that kind of level on a few occasions, but not constantly.
Yeah, exactly. And it's rare too. My level of specificity with everything, after I met with Garem and I heard his work, it was that sense of knowing. And you feel very lucky when you have that sense of knowing that someone is exactly perfect. Just like with David Proctor, just, it's exactly the perfect collaboration, and there's no reason to look elsewhere. And that's how I felt about Garem from our very first meeting. And I think it really paid off in beautiful dividends. His score is it's very timeless. So I hope people listen to, whether they watch Black Beauty or they're just listening to his music. And I think his what he's developed for the score really stands on its own. And I play it just for pleasure to just listen to throughout the house. It's very, very nice.
It's a beautiful score, a great album, great listening experience, and also a great addition and contribution to your film, the icing on the cake, so to speak.
Yes, very much so.
And Ashley, what's actually next for you, if you still have some time left? You mentioned Ron Howard, Brian Grazer, and Stephanie Sperber of Imagine Entertainment previously.
Yes, I'm really excited to be working with them on a television series. It's an elevated family series based on the Breyer horse brand, which is, most little girls can probably recall owning little Breyer horses or playing with them in their youth. A very, very iconic, very timeless brand. A great family company. So we've developed a television series, which only a little bit of information has come out about it so far, but I can say that it has a peppering of magic and horses, and it's a beautiful world to live in. And I'm excited for children and families to see that once we get that going. So I've written the pilot for that, and we'll see what this year holds with the world becoming a little bit, hopefully, more normal. And then I'll just say, in terms of horse projects, I have another one in the future that I'm not allowed to talk about yet, but there is another horse movie that we're developing. And I've got a few projects of my own that hopefully will be gaining some steam as we progress into this year. And one passion project, I've started writing a children's book about a unicorn, which I've wanted to write for some time.
Great. Sounds promising. Looking forward to all of your new projects, and of course to the one you will be doing with or for Ron Howard and Brian Grazer. Ron Howard, one of my favorite directors of all time, so you can't go wrong with Ron Howard. Mostly.
Such an iconic person and such a kind person, and I feel very fortunate to be working with some really, really wonderful people.
Yes. And Ron Howard, he also has a very great eye for detail and for cinematography, and he has great cinematographers. I especially love the work of Salvatore Totino. He is, I think, one of the best out there, and he has worked with Ron, I think, 9 or 10 times or so.
Yes, he has on the Da Vinci Code, right? Da Vinci.
Yes. For instance, Da Vinci, and of course Frost Nixon, and Inferno, Angels and Demons, and Cinderella Man. He's worked with Sal quite a few times. Yes.
Yes, yeah. Well, it's wonderful to you work so much of your young adult life to hope to get to a place like this, and I'm only at the very beginning of it, really. But I feel very fortunate and very lucky to have the hard work paying off, and to just bring more beautiful projects with great messages to people. And that has become even clearer to me in terms of how I feel my path as a filmmaker is supposed to be forged. I really want to tell stories that when the final image fades, people walk away from the theater and they feel excited and empowered and moved by what we've crafted. I think there's a big responsibility to being a filmmaker and a storyteller, because you're influencing people and you have the ability to inspire people. So to use that for good, that's what I'm hoping to do.
Great. Ashley, is there anything else you would like to add? Anything else that comes to mind?
I think for anyone listening to this who might want to go into our industry, if I had a piece of advice, I would say be fearless, work really hard, and never let the your geographic location slow you down. Never let society's sometimes antiquated views slow you down. Our world is changing in such a beautiful way, and I think just hard work, as simple as it might sound, really pays off. But my advice, if I could put it into a nutshell, is be fearless. So thank you so much for having me, Michael.
Ashley, thank you so very much for taking so much time out of your busy schedule. I really appreciate that. I had a great time talking to you, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation as well.
I loved the conversation, Michael. Thank you so much.